The case of the Whitaker family. The Whitaker family was a family like no other. The father, named Kent, owned a business in the construction field, which he had also inherited from his parents. It was a well-established business of several generations, doing very well economically. Patricia, the mother, was a school teacher but decided to retire from work when she had her first child and dedicated herself to taking care of her son. Their first son, the eldest, was named Bart, and a couple of years later, they had another boy, Kevin. These two children were quite privileged. As their friends saw them, they were given everything they wanted, attended the best schools, and their house always seemed to be the place where everyone wanted to gather because they always had the latest toys and the latest movies. Their mother, Patricia, was always there taking care of them, and having been a school teacher, she had a lot of empathy with children, so the kids felt very happy at home. As money was never a problem for them, they focused more on their children doing what made them happy, what fulfilled them. Bart, the eldest son, shared his passion for cycling with his father from a very young age, which meant they spent a lot of time together, always fixing their bikes and going on rides. The relationship between the two brothers was also quite good, quite close, although everyone described them as polar opposites. The older brother, Bart, was more extroverted, more of a joker, somewhat more rebellious. Kevin, on the other hand, was much calmer. Everyone said he seemed more attached, more thoughtful, sensitive, and generally more considerate. This difference, instead of separating them, seemed to bring them closer together, complementing each other. Since both were quite popular with their respective groups of friends, there didn't appear to be any competition between them. Life for them seemed almost perfect. Their parents never fought, at least not in front of them. They had no major problems. Both children were well-educated, well-fed, and didn't suffer any violence or abuse at home. Their neighbors said they were the kind of family you set as an example for your own, the kind of family you aspire to have one day. In February 2003, Bart, the eldest son of the Whitaker family, was 23, and his younger brother, Kevin, was 19. Both were university students. On December 10th, Bart excitedly called his parents. He had aced his final exams and was graduating with honors. Overjoyed, the family decided to dine out for a special dinner. They gathered at their home first, where Bart received a coveted Rolex watch as a graduation gift. The family then piled into the father's SUV and headed to Bart's favorite restaurant. The evening was filled with joy, captured in photographs taken by Bart's father, but the cheerful atmosphere was short-lived. Upon returning home, Kevin, the youngest, was the first to step out of the SUV and head towards the house. Just as he reached the stairs inside, he was shockingly shot in the chest. Patricia, standing in the doorway, was also shot in the chest. Kent, following behind, was hit in the arm, causing him to fall outside the house. Meanwhile, Bart, who had returned to the SUV for his cell phone, heard the gunshots. He hurried into the house and encountered an assailant in a balaclava, whom he believed to be African American, fleeing through the kitchen's back door. In the ensuing chaos, Bart was shot in the arm but managed to avoid more serious injury. The attacker escaped. Bart, now in the living room, frantically dialed emergency services, not realizing a neighbor had already called them. By the time of Bart's call, the entire family had been attacked. As police and ambulances were dispatched, a concerned neighbor, hearing the gunshots, rushed over. He found Kent outside, gravely injured but conscious, and quickly fashioned a tourniquet from his shirt. Approaching Patricia, all she could utter was, "He shot us," before succumbing to her injuries and being unable to speak further. The neighbors stayed by their side until help arrived. Tragically, young Kevin was pronounced dead at the scene, a heartbreaking end to what began as a night of celebration. In the wake of the tragic shooting, Patricia, gravely injured, was airlifted to the hospital. Sadly, her injuries were too severe, and she passed away before they could reach the hospital. Meanwhile, Kent and Bart, the eldest son, both wounded in the arm, were rushed to the hospital by ambulance. Thankfully, they were conscious and alert, their conditions not life-threatening. The crime scene was a hive of police activity as investigators tried piecing together the events of that fateful night. Initially, it looked like a robbery gone horribly wrong. The lone glove lay outside, a haunting clue, and inside, a gun, the instrument of the night's horror, was found on the kitchen floor close to where Bart had been shot. The story took an unexpected turn the following day. A reporter, delving deeper into Bart's claimed university graduation, made a startling discovery. Bart was not enrolled at the university and was far from graduating. This revelation, once passed to the police, added a complex layer to the investigation. In the hospital, detectives confronted Kent with the news of Bart's academic deception. Surprisingly, Kent's reaction was one of calm acceptance rather than shock or grief, despite the tragedy that had struck his family. The police then turned to Bart, seeking an explanation for his lies. Overwhelmed by academic pressure and fearful of disappointing his high-expectation parents, Bart confessed to fabricating his educational success. Amidst this turmoil, the community gathered to mourn Patricia and Kevin's passing. The funeral service, attended by over 1,000 people, reflected the family's standing in the community. Friends of Kevin shared heartfelt tributes, painting a picture of a generous and beloved individual. Bart, too, was a focal point of these tributes, often hailed as a role model by his younger brother. As the investigation progressed, the initial theory of a burglary unraveled. Despite the presence of cash and valuables in the house, nothing was missing, steering the investigation towards more personal motives behind the tragic incident. The detectives, piecing together the chilling events at the Whitaker home, noticed something odd about the master bedroom. The drawers were all slightly open. It was as if someone had peeked inside but didn't rummage through. Curiously, nothing seemed missing, and there were no signs of forced entry. It was as if the attacker knew exactly when the family would return, a suspicion further fueled by the precise nature of the shooting. For shots were fired in the dark house, each hitting a different family member, with 4 shell casings found at the scene. It seemed the assailant either knew the layout of the house well or was an exceptionally skilled shooter. The gun used in the shooting, found on the kitchen floor, bore no fingerprints, just a partial palm print, not enough to identify anyone. When they traced the gun's registration, it was linked to Kevin, the younger son who was already deceased. He had kept the gun in a safe in his room, which had been forcefully opened. Intriguingly, the master bedroom, where valuable items were stored, was left untouched. Instead, the focus was on Kevin's room, where the safe was cracked open to retrieve the gun. This indicated that the assailant was searching for something specific and knew exactly where to find it. The only item missing from the house was Bart's cell phone, which he had dropped during the chase and the assailant had picked up. The investigation took a turn when a friend from Bart's past reached out to the police. This friend revealed a shocking plot. 2 years earlier, in February 2001, Bart had solicited him to murder his family in exchange for payment. The plan detailed by the friend mirrored the actual events that unfolded. Although the friend, Adam, had an alibi for the night of the murders, the police were intrigued by the striking similarities between the planned and executed crimes. Adding to the complexity, Jennifer, another friend of Bart's, had overheard him and his roommate discussing a similar plot. Alarmed, she confronted Bart, who ambiguously brushed off her concerns. Despite Jennifer's subsequent report to the police and their conversation with Bart's parents, the matter was not pursued further, partly due to the parents' trust in their son. Following their discharge from the hospital, Bart and his father, Kent, returned to live in their house. Despite the police's concerns for Kent's safety, he remained steadfast in his belief in Bart's innocence, noting Bart's exemplary behavior and newfound religious devotion since leaving the hospital. The mystery deepened around Bart's involvement in the crime. Detectives couldn't shake off their suspicions, especially recalling his previous attempt to plot a similar crime with his friend Adam. They started digging into Bart's current circle, zeroing in on 2 names: Chris, his roommate, and Stephen, a neighbor. Both young men were known for their carefree lifestyles, lacking stable jobs and clear future plans. When the police questioned them, both Chris and Stephen staunchly denied any involvement in the crime. In an unconventional move, the detectives asked for DNA and sent samples from the duo. They used a sterilized gauze soaked in distilled water to capture their scents. These samples were then lined up alongside others, including the suspected ones. A scent detection dog was employed, first introduced to the scent of the gun, drawers, and glove from the crime scene, and then to the lineup of scent samples. Remarkably, in all 3 tests, the dog matched the scent on the crime scene items to Chris's scent. However, this type of evidence wasn't enough to hold up in court, and detectives knew they needed more to build a solid case. As they delved deeper, detectives found that the robbery scene didn't add up, and Bart's lie about attending university only cast more doubt on him. They even tapped the phone lines of Chris and Stephen, hoping to catch something incriminating. Bart, for his part, seemed cooperative during police interrogations and even participated in a reenactment at the crime scene, but his accounts were vague and unconvincing. In a twist, the police got Adam, the friend who had revealed Bart's 2001 murder plan, to call and blackmail Bart. In that call, Bart neither confirmed nor denied his involvement but agreed to pay Adam $20,000 to keep silent. Later, Adam received $250 in cash from Bart, and the police found Bart's fingerprints on the envelope, further linking him to the crime. 7 months after the murders, in July 2004, Bart told his father, Kent, he was going out with friends. The next morning, with Bart nowhere to be found, a worried Kent contacted the police. They discovered Bart's truck abandoned outside some apartments, far from his home, with the engine still running. This strange occurrence, coupled with the fact that Bart had stolen $7,000 from Kent, started to turn Kent's belief in his son's innocence. The police, not letting up, increased pressure on Chris and Stephen. They conducted extensive interviews with their families and acquaintances, keeping the investigation active. Their persistence paid off a year later. Unable to live with the guilt, Stephen came clean to the police, confirming their suspicions. He confessed that Bart had orchestrated the murder of his family, motivated by the prospect of inheriting everything if his younger brother was also eliminated. Bart had promised a share of the inheritance to both Chris and Stephen, though he never specified an amount. Stephen revealed that while he didn't enter the house and only acted as the getaway driver, Chris was the one who went inside and executed the shootings. Stephen also admitted that he was initially reluctant but was coerced into the plan. The final piece of evidence surfaced when the police, 18 months after the crime, discovered a backpack thrown into a lake by Stephen and Chris. Inside the backpack were items linking them to the murders: a chisel with blue paint matching the forced-open safe, bullets identical to those used in the crime, a matching glove to the one found at the crime scene, a partially empty water bottle with Chris's DNA, 2 cell phones registered in Bart's name, used for communication during the crime. After the shocking confession from Stephen, the police quickly arrested Chris and Stephen. But the saga took another twist 8 days later, on September 15, 2005. A Mexican man named Rudy Rios, lured by a $10,000 police reward, made a call that would crack the case wide open. Rios confessed he had sold his identity to Bart for $3,000 and had even helped him escape to a small town on the Mexican border. There, Bart, funded by the stolen money from his father, blended into the local life. He rented a room, became a regular at the local church, made new friends, and even found a girlfriend. Her family, owning a furniture business, unsuspectingly welcomed him, believing his fabricated tale of being an injured military deserter from Afghanistan. Rios, eyeing the reward money, gave the police detailed information on Bart's location, leading to his arrest by Mexican authorities for illegal residency. He was then handed over to the U.S. police to face trial for the grim events of December 10th. On that fateful night, Bart had orchestrated a dinner outing under the pretense of celebrating his false university graduation. He needed his family to leave and return home together, setting the stage for the planned attack. At the house, Bart casually took photos with his family, even making an obscene gesture in one, a haunting detail given the impending doom he knew was coming. Bart maintained a calm face at the restaurant, later describing himself as feeling numb. Meanwhile, Chris, waiting in Bart's truck, accidentally dropped a glove, a critical piece of evidence later found by the police. Using the key and alarm code given by Bart, Chris entered the house, avoiding any signs of forced entry. He retrieved the gun from Kevin's safe and lay in wait. As the family left the restaurant, Stephen, stationed outside, gave Chris the signal. Stephen discreetly followed the family home, parking a block away to await the aftermath. Chris, following the plan, shot the 3 family members inside the house and then Bart in the arm to disguise him as another victim. Bart's subsequent call to emergency services included a misleading description of the attacker, further complicating the initial investigation. After the horrendous act, the 2 drove to a lake, their mission to dispose of a bag containing the damning evidence of their crime. Back at their homes, Chris and Stephen waited anxiously for Bart's call, expecting to discuss their payment for the grim deed. Yet, the call never came, and Bart failed to deliver any form of compensation for their involvement. March 2007 marked the beginning of Bart's trial, where a series of startling admissions came to light. Bart confessed to plotting the murder of his family, not once but 3 times. His first attempt dated back to December 2000 with a couple of friends. Their plan failed when an attempted break-in triggered the house alarm, sending them fleeing. A few months later, Bart designed another plan with his friend Adam, which never materialized beyond mere talk, thanks to their friend Jennifer overhearing and reporting them. The third attempt, tragically successful, was executed with Chris and Stephen, even after his parents uncovered the second plot. Bart, driven by a deep desire to see his family dead, did not deter from his fatal intentions. During the trial, friends involved in the earlier unsuccessful plans were granted immunity in exchange for their testimony against Bart. Despite Bart's claims of guilt and remorse, Stephen's testimony painted a different picture, revealing Bart's cold request to finish the job by killing his father in the hospital. Bart's duplicity extended even to his girlfriend, Stanley, in Mexico. He spun a web of lies, claiming he was an only child, unloved, with a mother who was a prostitute. Living under a false identity, he felt emboldened to fabricate this false narrative. In a disturbing revelation, his girlfriend testified that Bart, in a twisted attempt to comfort her during a family dispute, suggested they could kill her parents, a suggestion she thankfully did not take seriously. The trial, lasting a mere 7 days, concluded with the jury needing only 2 hours to declare Bart guilty. With the death penalty looming over him in Texas, Bart took the stand in his defense, pleading for his life and arguing against capital punishment. The prosecution grilled Bart on the potential danger he posed to society. His defense? He claimed to have harbored hatred only towards his family. After 10 hours of deliberation, the jury sentenced him to death. Bart's case was peculiar. There was no history of abuse from his parents. They were loving, supportive, and provided him with every opportunity, including luxury cars and a house for university. Despite receiving everything materially, Bart testified he felt unloved and blamed his family for the person he had become, seeking revenge for a life he resented. Bart's journey through the justice system was a tumultuous one, marked by repeated attempts by his lawyers to overturn his death sentence. Yet, each appeal hit a dead end as the courts consistently denied them. Throughout this ordeal, Kent, Bart's father, remained a steadfast pillar of support. Despite the gravity of his son's crimes, Kent publicly forgave Bart, professing belief in his son's remorse and vowing to stand by him until the very end. As the years in prison passed, the inevitable drew closer for Bart. 11 years after his sentencing, his execution was scheduled for February 22, 2018. With the clock ticking down, Kent ramped up his efforts to save his son. He appeared on television programs and passionately pleaded with the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, hoping for a miracle. In a dramatic turn of events just 2 days before the execution, the board, moved by Kent's unwavering advocacy, unanimously recommended clemency for Bart. However, the final word was in the hands of the Texas governor. On the day destined for Bart's execution, as the grim procedures commenced, a glimmer of hope emerged. Bart had his last meal and precious moments with his father, perhaps for the last time. But fate had a twist in store. 45 minutes before the execution, the governor granted Bart clemency, sparing his life on the condition that he would never challenge his new sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, Chris, the triggerman in the tragic saga, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years behind bars. Stephen, the getaway driver who aided the prosecution, faced a relatively lighter sentence of 15 years due to his cooperation and has since been released from prison. David Wayne Schroeder, nicknamed Dave, was born on August 5, 1967, and lived in Onalaska, Wisconsin. He grew up in Bangor, Maine, and graduated from Bangor High School in 1985. He was married to Carla and had 3 sons and a foster adult daughter. On September 22, 2012, while at church, Dave was not feeling well, so his wife took him home early around 2:10 p.m., where he planned to try and get some sleep. His oldest son arrived home within about 15 minutes, and strangely, Dave was gone. He had apparently left on foot without his money, wallet, cell phone, or identification. Dave had many health problems, including high blood pressure, high cholesterol, sleep apnea, and poorly controlled insulin-dependent diabetes. He was 45 years old, weighed 300 pounds, and stood 6 feet 5 inches tall. He was on medication and wouldn't have been able to survive very long without it. Yet his medicine was also left behind in the home. When Carla returned home from church, she asked her son where Dave was. He told her he hadn't seen him. Within an hour, Carla reported him missing, but because he was an adult, police waited 5 days before conducting a search. A tracking dog picked up Dave's scent, leading across the street and then for a mile along nearby railroad tracks before losing the trail. Authorities deployed helicopters, tracking dogs, and cadaver dogs, with the Department of Natural Resources assisting. They also searched a nearby swamp with quicksand-like mud, but found nothing. Dave was described as a devoted parent, especially to his youngest son, Jacob, who was severely disabled, wheelchair-bound, and required around-the-clock care. Dave was also active in his church, where he played guitar during Sunday services. He disappeared a week after his 16th wedding anniversary, and Carla confirmed they had no marital problems. However, she noted that before his disappearance, Dave had been acting as if something was bothering him. His family believes he is deceased and had him declared legally dead in 2014. Tragically, his youngest son, Jacob, passed away in November 2015 at age 13, never learning what happened to his father. Dave has never been heard from again, and as of today, his case remains unsolved. Rosemary Bllee was born on September 16, 1987. She was a 22-year-old wife and mother of 2 daughters, both under the age of 2. She was last seen in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin, at 7 p.m. on August 21, 2009. She left her home in the 2300 block of River Road to travel 5 miles to Cushing, Wisconsin, to meet a cousin at a bar. Her husband stated that sometime that night, Rose contacted him and said she would be home by midnight. However, she never arrived in Cushing to meet her cousin and has never been heard from again. 5 days after her disappearance, her 2001 Pontiac Grand Am was found strangely in the parking lot west of the post office in downtown Grantsburg. The lot is normally used by semi-truck drivers to park their tractor trailers. The car was undamaged. There was no evidence of foul play, and the keys were missing. Grantsburg is about 30 miles from her home in St. Croix Falls and 15 miles from Cushing, where she was supposed to be going. A few weeks after the car was found, the village drained Memory Lake to make sure her body wasn't there. It is approximately a 5-minute walk from where her car was found to the lake. Rose has family in Grantsburg, and she graduated from Grantsburg High School. Rose didn't have any credit cards or debit cards, and she left home with very little money. Her marriage was troubled, and police were called to the home at least once to intervene in a domestic violence incident. Her husband had previously filed for divorce in June 2009 but withdrew the filing after reconciling. He passed a polygraph test and isn't considered a suspect in her disappearance. His divorce petition was granted in 2010, and he now has sole custody of their daughters. Rose had fallen off a horse a week before her disappearance. She told her mother she was having headaches after the accident, and her mother advised her to see a doctor, but there's no evidence she ever did. Her mother speculated that she may have become disoriented due to her injury and wandered away. Since her disappearance, the Polk County Sheriff's Office has received over 200 tips and has interviewed more than 150 people, hoping to find answers. However, she remains missing, and the case is unsolved. Gerald Strag, nicknamed Jerry, went missing on October 2, 2002, from Waponi, Wisconsin. He was last seen at the Dodge Correctional Institution, where he had worked as a prison guard for 25 years. He loved to golf and was scheduled to participate in a golf tournament the weekend of October 5, 2002, and was looking forward to it, but he never showed up. He was reportedly one of Wisconsin's best amateur golfers at the time. He was supposed to return to work on October 8th, but he never showed up and never called in. Jerry's father went to his apartment on October 11th to find out why his son wasn't answering his phone. He found the apartment unlocked with all his son's personal belongings, including his cell phone, wallet, ID, car keys, and golf clubs left behind. The lights were on, and the television was tuned in to the Golf Channel. Not knowing where his son could be, he reported him missing to police. Investigators found no signs of a struggle in the residence. His car and his motorcycle were in the apartment garage, and the only thing missing from the apartment was his gun. Extensive searches of the Waponi area have turned up no clues as to Jerry's whereabouts, and there has been no activity on his bank account since his disappearance. He is described as a quiet, focused man who is divorced and has no children. It is important to note several things regarding Jerry. He was having personal problems at the time of his disappearance because he had been arrested for drunk driving for the 4th time and feared losing his job because of it. Strangely, he disappeared at about the same time inmate Thomas Deering escaped from the prison where Jerry worked. Another guard was disciplined in connection with the incident. However, Deering's escape is not thought to have anything to do with Jerry's disappearance. In 1983, nearly 20 years before Jerry's disappearance, he was held hostage during a prison riot by inmates who tortured him and threatened to set him on fire. His father stated his son was never the same after the prison riot in 1983. Jerry reportedly was traumatized by the incident and was believed to have suffered from PTSD because of it. But it's unclear what, if anything, it had to do with his disappearance nearly 20 years later. Investigators are still not sure what happened to Jerry, and his friends theorize he may have taken his own life. Others have suggested that he went to Harkon Marsh to check his deer stand but became injured and died. There is no evidence to substantiate these or any other theories, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Kayla Mayberg was born on August 29, 1993. She loved gymnastics and was part of the dance team at school. In 2007, her friend Megan introduced 15-year-old Kayla to the party scene in Wausau, Wisconsin. She and her friends had started leaving the small, quiet town of Antigua, Wisconsin, and venturing out further to other parties in Wausau. They were telling their parents they were staying the night at each other's houses, but they were actually staying the weekends at Kayla's 19-year-old boyfriend, Miguel Maruro's party house. They would eventually break up, but she continued to party at his house, and they were reportedly trying to mend their relationship on August 11, 2009. Kayla went to her grandparents' home, where her father, James, was living at the time because he was ill with cancer. She had called her mother, Hope, and told her she might go see some friends later. Her father, who has since passed away, had stated that the last thing he heard from his daughter was her yelling through the house that she was going out, and then she left. She had told him prior to that she was staying the night with her friend, Natasha. It should also be noted that Kayla didn't own a cell phone, and getting in touch with her after she left would have been very difficult. She was picked up that evening by her older brother's friend, 24-year-old Kevin Kilchecki, who drove her around her hometown of Antigua. They stopped at McDonald's, and Kayla went in to speak to her friend, Beth, while Kevin stayed in the car. She told Beth that the two were going to ride around and smoke. That was the last time she was seen, and it would be 6 days before her parents would realize she was definitely missing due to miscommunication between her parents and brother. Also, her mother, Hope, was apprehensive about filing a missing persons report because a day or two before she went missing, She and another girl's mother had filed a missing person report, and while at the police station, found out that Kayla had stayed overnight at an outside party in town and was safe. After finding this information out, Kayla promised her mother that she would try to get her act together. So her mother didn't want another false alarm by filing a missing persons report again if she wasn't sure Kayla was actually missing. The night she went missing, Kevin claimed that he dropped Kayla off at her ex-boyfriend Miguel's home, which was about 40 minutes from Antigua. He stayed at the house, which was located at 1017 East Wausau Avenue, across the street from the Colonial Manor nursing home. The house had all the lights turned off and looked as if no one was home. Kevin also claimed that he never saw Kayla go inside the home. It is very strange that he would claim to drop her off there because a week earlier, her ex-boyfriend Miguel had moved into another home due to that home being condemned and in desperate need of repairs. Also, the house was boarded up, and Kayla had already been to Miguel's new home and knew that he had moved. So why would she ask to be dropped off at an empty house? He stated he dropped her off somewhere around 10:30 p.m. and went straight home to Deerbrook, where his mother gave him an alibi, stating that she saw him in the hallway around midnight. Police would search Miguel's new home and conduct an interview with him, and he would say he did not see Kayla the night she disappeared, and that he hadn't seen her since she was at a party at his house the weekend prior to her disappearance. Kayla had seen her brother earlier that night, and her friend Beth had talked to her friend Natasha, and they all had no knowledge of her having plans to go to Wausau that night. Authorities initially believed Kayla was a runaway, and they stated her friends appeared evasive, as if they were trying to conceal her whereabouts. Police began to reconsider the runaway theory as weeks passed without any contact. They searched Miguel's previous home and noted that it was still boarded and locked up, with no evidence of anyone entering the home. They searched the surrounding woods with dogs and a small lake in the woods with divers. Nothing was found. In October 2009, Kevin was arrested and charged with second-degree reckless child endangerment, a felony related to substance use with Kayla on the night she was last seen. However, the charge was eventually dismissed in July 2011. After the case was dismissed, Kevin stopped cooperating with investigators, citing that he felt harassed by Kayla's family and the police. Investigators received assistance from the larger police department of the neighboring town of Madison in December 2009. They had a team of highly trained dogs that could only locate scents from human decomposition. They had a lineup of 10 vehicles, including Miguel's and Kevin's. The dogs would only alert on Kevin's vehicle. Kevin's cell phone records also indicated that he had called Kayla prior to picking her up that night, and all activity then ceased until 2 p.m. the next day. So either his phone died coincidentally, or he purposely shut it off. While Miguel's records corroborated the story he told police, it was discovered that an old cell phone of his had pinged off a tower in Lincoln County, about 40 miles north of Wausau, on the night of Kayla's disappearance. 2 calls were made, but a search of the area near the cell phone towers uncovered nothing. This prompted police to want to re-interview Miguel, but he denied their request, citing, like Kevin, that he felt harassed by both them and Kayla's family. There were 12 searches done in and around Antigua with hopes of finding Kayla. Cadaver and search dogs alerted on 2 separate locations during these searches, with both areas being connected to Kevin. One was a parcel of land owned by his parents, and the second was at the potato farm that Kevin worked at. However, they were unable to uncover enough evidence to link either scent to Kayla. On October 8, 2016, a YouTube video from October 2009 was sent to the Antigua Police Department, which featured a male subject who had tied up a girl in his basement. It had been anonymously uploaded to YouTube, and the girl strongly resembled Kayla. It hadn't reached the eyes of detectives until it went viral in 2016. The FBI got involved to track down who had created the video, and it was shared by numerous news outlets. While the renewed coverage of the case led to numerous tips being called in, 3 days later, it was proven to be a hoax, with those involved being actors who hadn't even heard about Kayla's disappearance. Kevin refused to take a polygraph test offered by the FBI and instead later took one from a private firm, which he claims he passed. The nature of the test and the questions that were asked have never been publicly released. He has never been charged in her disappearance but remains a primary suspect. The case remains an open and active investigation, and as of today, remains unsolved. Ashley Love graduated from Pius Catholic High School with honors in 2009. She was living with her parents and two brothers in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and working at an Arby's at the local mall. On the evening of October 9, 2009, she returned home to North 64th Street from work and spent time with her family as they watched a football game between the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings. Later on, 19-year-old Ashley took a shower and went to bed for the night. According to Ashley's family, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Her mother, Tammy, suddenly woke up around 2 a.m., unsure what had caused her to wake up, and then heard footsteps outside her door as if someone were running down the stairs. She opened her bedroom door to see a man with a bandana on his face holding a shotgun. The man ran out of the house and through the backyard. Ashley's father, Joe, ran upstairs and sadly found his daughter had just been shot and did not survive. Nobody in the house, including her two brothers, heard the gunshot. Her mother also thought she saw a second person running from the scene as well. Milwaukee detectives quickly discounted burglary as a motive after learning nothing was missing from the house, but they suspected she had been specifically targeted. Tammy described the gunman to detectives as a Hispanic male, about 20 years old, of average height and build. He had short, spiked black hair and was wearing a dark zippered sweater or jacket. Detectives received reports that Ashley had been seen secretly meeting a mystery man on several occasions before her murder. Her lifelong friend, Joey, stated she was surprised Ashley didn't confide in her about the secret boyfriend. The man, according to Villarreal, is believed to work in construction. Ashley's parents and investigators pleaded for the man to come forward, but the mystery man has yet to be identified. There were reports that Ashley was seen entering a blue pickup truck with an unidentified man in the months before the tragedy, but investigators couldn't confirm the accounts. Investigators reported that evidence was collected from the home, but they have been unable to disclose that information. The suspect or suspects have never been found, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. The horrible James Bulger case. On February 12, 1993, a Friday afternoon in Bootle, England, specifically at the New Strand Shopping Centre, Denise was with a friend and her son, James Bulger. James had recently stopped using a stroller, as he was 2 years and 10 months old, so he was walking alongside his mother. At around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Denise's friend took a different path, leaving Denise alone with her little James. At one point, Denise went to a store with her son, bought what she needed, and when she realized it, she saw that James was not with her. It was only a momentary distraction for a few seconds as she checked her purse, but this oversight would change their lives forever. We all have memories of getting separated from family members in a shopping center as children, so the response here was quite common. When Denise left the store, she reunited with her friend, who had just passed by the front of the shop, but she didn't see James anywhere. They assumed he had wandered off, so they began asking the mall security guards and anyone they encountered if they had seen the child. Soon, announcements were made over the mall speakers, inquiring about James, and as desperation mounted, several police patrols came to the area until nightfall, yet there was still no sign of James. The next step for the police was to review the shopping center's security cameras, as it was their only hope of discovering what had happened that afternoon with James. It was 1993, and security cameras had limited resolution at that time, and this particular shopping center didn't have many of them. However, one camera happened to be pointed at the store. The footage showed James leaving through the door, and Denise's lapse in attention was indeed brief, as within a minute, she could be seen searching for James at the door, but by then, it was already too late. The next trace of James was captured by one of the overhead cameras, showing him following two individuals. What was unusual was that these two individuals appeared to be teenagers, seemingly between the ages of 14 and 18. In the final image of James, he was seen leaving the shopping center with one of these boys holding his hand. Initially, there was hope, with the authorities thinking that these young boys wouldn't be capable of harming little James. However, 2 days later, the truth would come to light. More than 4 kilometers away from the shopping center, while playing, some teenagers stumbled upon the remains of a child on the train tracks who had apparently been struck by a train. This discovery immediately set off alarms, and they contacted one of James' uncles, who unmistakably identified the child as James Bulier. It was clear that this was no accident. In fact, all evidence suggested that James had died before being struck by the train. His body bore so many injuries that investigators couldn't determine the exact cause of his death. There were two more unsettling details. He had a pair of batteries in his mouth, and his left eye had been eerily painted blue. It was as if his young body had been subjected to inhumane experimentation, and the crime scene would remain etched in the memory of all the officers present as one of the most horrifying scenes they had ever encountered in their careers. The local community was in shock and outrage over the tragic incident. Many expressed their heartfelt condolences to the family, particularly Denise. While she had a momentary lapse of attention, it was a mistake anyone could make, and those with empathy could understand the immense pain she was going through. She replayed in her mind daily the haunting thought that she might have saved her son had she been more vigilant at that moment. In addition to the sympathy, there were some individuals, including her own husband at one point, who angrily confronted her and blamed her for not being attentive enough, asserting that the tragedy could have been prevented with more careful supervision. The potential key to identifying the culprit lay in the shopping center's security cameras, but their image quality was so poor that even determining the suspects' ages was impossible. Various media outlets attempted to enhance the images in hopes of identifying the individuals, but their efforts proved fruitless. The last glimmer of hope rested on someone coming forward to confess to the crime. On February 16th, just 2 days after James' body was discovered, the police received a crucial call. The caller accused a 12-year-old boy named Jonathan Green of being the perpetrator, and shockingly, this accusation came from his own parents. They claimed that their son bore a resemblance to one of the suspects captured in the security camera footage. A grave accusation indeed when it comes from one's own parents. Law enforcement took this accusation seriously and subjected Jonathan to nearly 23 hours of relentless interrogation before eventually declaring him innocent. In a subsequent interview, Jonathan revealed the profound psychological trauma he endured during this time, spending countless sleepless nights. The intensity of the questioning even tempted him to falsely admit guilt at one point. The parents, however, did not hesitate much before making the accusation, even though the images they based it on were captured just days earlier. Furthermore, Jonathan was a mere 12 years old, and giving him the benefit of the doubt should have been a priority. The only evidence against him was a vague resemblance, which wasn't particularly strong given the poor image quality, akin to images taken through a blur. The media, driven by the pursuit of attention, without much consideration, broadcasted Jonathan as the prime suspect. This prompted people, fueled by a thirst for justice, to attack the vehicle in which he traveled with his parents and to vandalize their home by pelting it with stones until all the windows were shattered. The harassment was so severe that the Greens had to abandon their home and relocate to another city. Just 6 days after James' disappearance, a television program showed all available information about the case up to that date, hoping that a viewer might provide a clue to apprehend the culprits. The program was immensely popular at the time, and following its broadcast, the police received several calls, with one call standing out as particularly valuable. It came from a woman who firmly believed that the real culprits were Robert Thompson and John Venables. These boys were known for their mischievous behavior, which had escalated into criminal activities such as theft. They had gained a notorious reputation at their schools and were frequent truants. However, a significant conflict arose when the police suspected that the culprits were at least 14 years old, while these potential suspects were just 10 years old. Due to this discrepancy and the fact that there were several other suspects of similar age, the police decided to pay a visit to the homes of these young boys, although their expectations were not high. Initially, they observed some peculiar behavior, but it was challenging to draw definitive conclusions from these observations since the police had very little experience dealing with child offenders of this age. Subsequently, it was confirmed that both boys had skipped school on that particular day. Additionally, there was a noticeable detail. One of John's shoes displayed clear stains of blue paint. This piece of evidence led the authorities to consider them as prime suspects, and they were promptly taken to the police station. Unlike the previous case with Jonathan, This time the authorities handled it discreetly to prevent the young boys from enduring the extensive hours of questioning in a single session. Consequently, the interrogations were spread out over multiple days. The initial day of questioning proved to be challenging, given the boys' age of just 10, and the authorities couldn't subject them to the same scrutiny as adults. As a result, both boys steadfastly denied any involvement in the crime, and their age and emotional state played a significant role in this response. However, as the interrogations continued into the second day, a marked contrast emerged between Robert and John. Robert remained composed, displaying little emotion, not shedding a tear, and maintaining a stoic demeanor. On the other hand, John's emotional resilience began to waver, and he eventually confessed to the crime. John revealed that on that fateful afternoon, he and Robert had decided to skip school as they often did and ventured to the shopping center. Their initial actions upon arrival included stealing various items, among them a pair of batteries and a can of blue paint. Growing weary of their theft spree, a sinister idea took hold in their young minds, the idea of kidnapping a child. They planned to take the child onto the street and push them in front of an oncoming car. To execute this plan, they first signaled to another child to approach them. Fortunately, the child's vigilant mother intervened in time, preventing any harm. Continuing with their disturbing plan, as they passed by a butcher shop, they signaled to James Bulier through the window. Tragically, James responded to their call and left the shop, unbeknownst to his mother. The two boys quickly whisked James away from the shopping center to carry out their dark scheme. However, James, with his remarkable balance, made it challenging for them to push him far enough onto the road for a car to strike him. Undeterred, they decided to take James to a nearby canal, intending to push him in and drown him. Upon reaching the canal, they pushed him from above, but instead of falling into the water, James tumbled and struck his forehead, resulting in a visible bump. His cries for help filled the air. It is estimated that approximately 38 individuals witnessed these two boys with James, and a few inquired about their actions. Initially, one of the boys falsely claimed that they were brothers, which caused frustration among those who witnessed the incident. It is important to note that the onlookers faced a challenging situation involving children who appeared innocent, making intervention at the time more complex. However, what remains alarming and subject to criticism is the false explanation provided by John and Robert to one individual, stating that James was a lost child and they were taking him to a police station. At that point, an adult had to be held accountable because this tragic incident could have been prevented. It's clearly irresponsible to entrust the care of a lost child to two 10-year-olds. After walking for more than 4 kilometers, the boys took James to a remote railway track, devoid of any witnesses, and carried out unspeakable acts that are too gruesome to detail. They utilized whatever items they could find, including bricks, stones, and even a hefty 10-kilogram metal bar, inflicting unimaginable suffering upon James. When he lay lifeless, their intentions were unclear, whether to stage it as an accident or to inflict further harm on this young life. They left his lifeless body on the railway track, concealed beneath debris, to remain unnoticed until a passing train. Even the police found it difficult to comprehend such a horrifying reality, and they believed that there must have been prior signs or indicators. Consequently, they decided to delve into the backgrounds of these two young boys. As the police investigation continued, it became evident that both boys had experienced remarkably similar childhoods. Robert Thompson resided in a dysfunctional household where he and his 6 siblings suffered constant abuse from their father. His mother grappled with severe alcohol-related issues and had once attempted suicide while setting their home on fire. Robert had earned a reputation as a thief, displaying violent tendencies and compulsive lying. John Venables, on the other hand, came from a fractured family where his parents were divorced, and he received minimal attention and affection. Coupled with his short temper, John often engaged in mischief and fights to garner attention, eventually leading to his expulsion from school. It's widely believed that Robert took on the role of the ringleader during their terrible actions. Throughout the interrogations, both boys attempted to shift blame onto each other. Robert, displaying a shrewd demeanor, would acknowledge his presence but claim that he left when he saw John beginning to torment James on the railway tracks. When confronted with questions that cornered him, he would feign tears without shedding a single drop. However, the presence of blood and strands of James' hair on his clothing, particularly his shoes, served as irrefutable evidence of his involvement. Consequently, on February 20th, both were declared guilty, identified only as Boy A and Boy B to circumvent potential issues similar to those faced by Jonathan Green. It was known only that they were two 10-year-old boys residing in Walton. This case was a recipe for turmoil. The brutal murder of a child as innocent as a 2-year-old had shaken the community, evoking tears and profound anger. The sentiment was so intense that it practically condemned the perpetrators to a life in hiding if they ever ventured into the public sphere. Yet, these culprits were merely children of 10, making any sentencing decision the subject of heated controversy. There was a significant divide in public opinion regarding the appropriate punishment for John Venables and Robert Thompson. While some called for the death penalty, others believed that a regular prison sentence would suffice. The debate also centered around the issue of anonymity. Why should these boys be shielded from public exposure when other murderers were not afforded the same privilege? Revealing their real names would effectively have been a death sentence, erasing all the efforts invested in their psychological rehabilitation. However, some may argue that if they didn't afford James a chance to live, why should they be allowed to live freely? When the trial started, the parents of the accused were moved to different parts of the country and assumed new identities following death threats. The full trial opened at Sessions House, Preston, on January 1993, conducted as an adult trial with the accused in the dock away from their parents, and the judge and court officials in legal regalia. The boys denied the charges of murder, abduction, and attempted abduction. James's mother, devastated by the loss of her son, could only muster the strength to attend the day of the verdict. It wasn't until the sentencing that the judge permitted the media to publish the faces of Robert and John, who had shown no remorse throughout the 17-day trial. The evidence presented indicated that both boys understood the difference between right and wrong. John's tears seemed to stem from the anticipation of their impending fate, while Robert remained emotionally detached. With this knowledge in mind, on November 24, 1993, John Venables and Robert Thompson, initially facing a minimum of 15 years in prison, received a different sentence. They were to be held in a juvenile detention center until they turned 18, avoiding a real prison experience. This decision disappointed the public to the extent that riots erupted, and vehicles believed to be carrying the boys were vandalized. However, these vehicles were decoys, and the boys were transported discreetly in other vehicles. From that point onward, they were granted new identities shrouded in secrecy, known only to the authorities tasked with monitoring their lives. Initially, public outrage soared when news broke that the government had allocated £1,500,000, roughly equivalent to $2 million, for the rehabilitation of these young boys. This sparked a moral dilemma, as many argued that this substantial sum could have been better spent on saving innocent children, providing them with essential medications and sustenance. After all, this money came from hardworking taxpayers who weren't keen on supporting these boys financially. Some demanded a minimum prison sentence of 15 years for the young offenders, and this demand held some validity. Despite the expertise of psychologists, it's well established that by the age of 18, an individual's brain hasn't fully matured, and latent issues may surface. Allowing potentially dangerous individuals to exit psychological support at this age was seen as a considerable risk. In June 2001, both boys were released, and their anonymity would only be lifted if they committed another crime. Interestingly, Robert, who initially appeared more problematic, managed to stay clear of criminal activity. On the contrary, John's behavior took a different turn, becoming a focal point for those questioning the efficacy of the system and how such individuals could be allowed to reintegrate into society. John's criminal history began with a brief jail sentence in 2008 for instigating a bar brawl and being found in possession of drugs. In 2010, he faced arrest for possessing indecent images related to child abuse. Subsequently, he was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison after confessing to downloading and disseminating such content online. Although he was released in 2013, He returned to jail in 2017 on the same charges. This time, he received a 40-month prison term after admitting to possessing over 1,000 explicit images. The exact details of his release and subsequent actions remain unclear, as authorities, seemingly regardless of his actions, continue to shield him from public scrutiny. Even 2 decades after the initial crime, John managed to claim another victim, 36-year-old Scott Bradley. Scott, a family man, fell prey to false rumors that he was, in fact, Robert Thompson. Over several months, he endured relentless harassment, insults, and threats directed at his family, and most importantly, his beloved son. During one phone call, he confided in his mother, expressing his unbearable distress and a desire to end his own life. Regrettably, she didn't take his words seriously, assuming the situation would eventually subside. Tragically, on August 10, 2012, Scott Bradley's mother discovered her son's lifeless body hanging from a noose. When authorities arrived at the scene, they determined it was a case of suicide. The mother of James Bulier, along with countless others, couldn't help but wonder if this tragedy might have been averted had the true identities of the original perpetrators been revealed. In late June 2019, it was reported that British officials had considered, reportedly spent, £65,000 in legal fees to keep Venable's identity a secret. Adele Jensen, who went by the nickname Addie, was a graduate of Dunwoody College of Technology and worked as a radiology technician. She had a beautiful 2-year-old daughter with Joshua Dow. She had lived with Joshua and their daughter, but after breaking up following a violent encounter, she moved in with her parents in Carver County, Minnesota, and had taken her daughter with her. She was saving up money to get her own apartment and enroll her daughter in preschool. On the night of November 17, 2015, she and Joshua, along with his brother, had gone to the downtown cabaret. For unknown reasons, after the club closed, he and his brother saw her walking down the street. They asked her to get in the car with them and go back home, but she refused. This was the last known time she was ever seen again. A few days after her parents reported her missing, Joshua was arrested on suspicion of her murder. The arrest happened after his brother went to police and gave a statement saying Addie was dead and he'd helped Joshua move her body. He said that Joshua had forced him to do it. Joshua's brother, who lived with him at his duplex, said at 5 a.m. on November 18th, he'd been asleep when the sound of a gunshot woke him up. Joshua told him he'd dropped a gun and it had gone off accidentally, and his brother went back to sleep. At about noon, Josh's brother woke up and found a friend who is now deceased in the duplex, helping his brother remove a blood-stained sofa. He also said that Addie's body was wrapped in plastic, like the plastic used at the warehouse where both Joshua and his brother worked in the 2500 block of North 2nd Street in Minneapolis. Cell phone records show that Joshua had been at the warehouse at 7:20 a.m. that morning. He told his brother that Addie had taken her own life. He allegedly held a gun to his brother's head and threatened him, and their mother telling him he had to help move the body, clean up the crime scene, and go along with the story that she was missing. The 3 men loaded the couch into the friend's van and later cut it in pieces and scattered the pieces in various locations. Joshua's brother then got rid of the .38 caliber revolver used in the crime, but police were able to recover it later. Joshua put her wrapped-up body in a box and taped it shut, and he and his brother painted over the blood-stained walls at the duplex. They moved the box with Addie's body to the warehouse. On November 19th, after she was reported missing, the brothers moved the body to a storage closet in the warehouse. Police went to the warehouse and couldn't find a body there, but they could smell decomposing flesh. On the morning of November 22nd, one of Joshua's co-workers at the warehouse had seen him there washing off plastic sheeting and putting boxes in a cart. About 20 minutes later, another witness saw him pushing a box from the warehouse loading dog into a Chevrolet pickup truck matching the description of the truck Addie had rented for Joshua's brother prior to her disappearance. When the police spoke to Joshua, he said he had tried to break up with Addie and she died by suicide afterwards, shooting herself on his couch, which he also disposed of. He said he thought she was going to get the last word by sending him to prison for her death. And he also didn't want their daughter to know her mother died by suicide, so he decided to get rid of her body. He admitted he'd dismembered it at the warehouse and dumped the parts in different garbage cans in the city. By then, the cans had already been emptied. According to text messages on his phone days before her disappearance, he and Addie had been fighting and the arguments had turned physical. When Addie threatened to buy a plane ticket and leave the area, Joshua told her he would get custody of their daughter and she would never see her again. The initial arrest had been for murder, but Joshua was instead charged with second-degree assault with a dangerous weapon and interference with a dead body while concealing evidence. In February 2016, he pleaded guilty to interference with a dead body as well as an unrelated drug charge. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. In December 2019, Joshua pleaded guilty to second-degree unintentional murder and admitted he had caused Addie's death and improperly disposed of her body. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. As of today, it still remains a mystery as to what really happened to Addie. Also, authorities sifted through 60 to 100 tons of garbage trying to find her remains, but their search has been unsuccessful and as of today, her body remains missing. Nathaniel Williams, who goes by Nate, was born in 1983. His parents were scientists and moved around a lot, so therefore he spent time as a child in the Bolivian Amazon, Colombia, Mexico, and New York. He attended high school in the Washington, D.C. area and would later move because of his love for water to Minnesota because of the many lakes, forests, and having the world's largest freshwater lake. He loved water so much he was given the nickname Fish in high school. His goal was to get a job in wildlife management or maybe as a game warden after he graduated. When he was deciding on schools, he would choose the University of Minnesota at Morris because of the many options for hunting and fishing nearby. Nate also had dyslexia and UMM was very helpful to students with this diagnosis. 21-year-old Nate was last seen on September 28, 2004, leaving his residence on campus in the 400 block of East 10th Street in Morris, Minnesota. He told his college roommates that he was planning to go on a fishing and hunting trip in Two Harbors, Minnesota. He said that he would be gone for 2 weeks and would return on October 10th. All he had with him when he left were 2 fishing rods and a single-shot 12-gauge shotgun in case. He saw a grouse and a blue-down comforter from his bed. Nate had told friends in the past that he dreamed of living off the land, disappearing into the wild and living by his own means, like a Special Forces soldier. 2 days later, sheriff's deputies found his teal and white 1966 Ford F-150 pickup truck north of Two Harbors on the Cowashu Lake Road in Lake County, Minnesota, near the Boundary Waters canoe area. However, there was no sign of Nate or any of his fishing or hunting gear. His parents, who lived in Silver Springs, Maryland, and his roommates reported him missing about a week later when the fishing trip seemed to be lasting longer than usual and he had not contacted anyone. He was not known to have any camping gear or believed to have purchased any during his trip. None of the items he was known to be carrying have ever been found. From credit card receipts, law enforcement was able to determine he had made stops in Brainerd, Grand Rapids, so this was his likely route. Several reports indicate the truck was actually stuck, leaving investigators to think he could have tried to walk out of the area or accepted a ride. Walking out would have been difficult since the area where he went missing is very dense. In 2012, a pilot, Michael Bradley, went missing in the area somewhere around Silver Bay and not even his plane had been found. Though it is not known exactly where he crashed, it gives you an idea as to how dense the area is and how hard it is to search. However, many people believe that due to all the fishermen and hunters that trek through the area, that someone would have found him after all this time. Therefore, it is speculated that he accepted a ride with someone, was hurt by an animal, or took off on his own. However, his parents do not believe he purposely left on his own, but they also don't believe that he is still alive. Authorities also do not believe he committed suicide and he was very close to his family. Both Morris and Lake County authorities are investigating his case, but as of today, it remains unsolved. Abdul Ciset was born on October 16, 1992 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and was the son of Senegalese immigrants. He was the first of his family to be born in the U.S. and was brought up in Minnesota until the early 2000s when his family returned to Senegal. After completing his education in Senegal, he moved to Beijing, China to attend college. He would then return to Minnesota, where he would later join the Minnesota National Guard in 2014. Abdul was highly intelligent, talented, and multilingual. He was fluent in French, Mandarin Chinese, and Wolof, a language from his parents' home in Senegal. His fellow soldiers described him as a natural-born leader who knew how to draw the best out of people. He already had overseas experience living with his parents for a time in Senegal and studying in China. Colleagues say he had plans to attend the Defense Language Institute, the military's premier language school in Monterey, California, to train as a human intelligence collector, and that his language skills and ease with people made him a perfect fit for it. On his 27th birthday on October 16, 2019, he had spoken to his parents on the phone. His father would say it was his birthday, so we sang along "Happy Birthday" to him. And like a soldier, like a very happy man, he was chanting and chanting with us over the phone. Sadly, tragedy would strike on his birthday, and he would succumb to a very senseless act. Police officers would find him lying in the road in the 500 block of 7th Street, near the apartment he shared with his sister. His family believes he was walking home around 4:30 a.m. in the Marcy Homes neighborhood when he saw someone breaking into someone else's car and tried to intervene. That is when he was stabbed to death. He was taken on his birthday to the Hennepin County Medical Center, the same hospital where he was born 27 years earlier, but would not survive. In the days after his death, shocked neighbors and police launched a safe walk. Officers were canvassing door to door for information. It led to no motive or suspects. Minneapolis police say there have been no arrests in the case and that detectives continue to investigate. Abdul's body was flown to his family's home in city of Touba, Senegal, where he was then buried. His family still seeks answers, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Corin Leonstad was born on February 17, 1987, and lived in Inver Grove Heights, Minnesota. Sadly, Corin's home life was very troubled. Her family moved frequently, their only income came from welfare payments, and her mother had been treated for cocaine abuse and emotional problems. Corin and her brother had spent several months in foster care in 1987, shortly after Corin was born. On June 1, 1992, 5-year-old Corin was dressed in a white sundress with green and pink watermelons on it as she went to play in Skyview Park near her home around 7:30 p.m. Only a few minutes later, her mother and stepfather sent her 2 older brothers to go get her from the park. However, she was nowhere to be found. 2 hours later, her mother reported her missing to the police. A boy playing in the park told authorities that he believed he saw Corin talking to an unidentified man that evening. The boy said that he saw a girl matching her description petting the man's dog. It has never been verified that the girl was in fact Corin. Robert Quivara was a longtime friend of Corin's mother, Mona Williams. Authorities viewed Robert as the main suspect in her disappearance quickly into their investigation. He often stayed overnight at the family's home when he was too intoxicated to drive home and was there the night Corin went missing. He reportedly left the home immediately after Corin went out to play. Police dogs tracked her scent to his home after her disappearance. Shockingly, witnesses told authorities that Robert often slept in the same bed as Corin when he stayed the night. Corin's mother stated that her daughter had accused Robert of molesting her on the day of her disappearance. Strangely, Mona did not tell the police about this until several days after her daughter disappeared. She actually claimed that she had forgotten about the incident until then. Authorities discovered a dress identical to the one Corin was last seen wearing in a pair of girls' underpants inside Robert's locker. The items of clothing had been stained with blood and semen. Blood stains were also discovered on a shower curtain inside Robert's trailer. DNA testing showed that the fluids could have come from both Corin and Robert. He was charged with her kidnapping, rape, and murder on June 5, 1992, for days after Corin disappeared. His brother Jerry Quivara was also arrested in the days after Corin's disappearance on suspicion of aiding and abetting his brother, but was released from custody without charges. Defense witnesses argued at Robert's trial that his locker and trailer were not secured, and that the evidence could have been planted there to frame him for Corin's disappearance. In 1992, Minnesota law did not allow the full use of DNA evidence at trials, although that has since changed. As a result, Robert was acquitted of all charges in connection with Corin's case. He has continued to maintain his innocence throughout the years and is unable to be charged for the crime again due to double jeopardy laws. Sadly, Corin's body has never been found, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. 50-year-old Rachel Anthony would meet a terrible fate on February 27, 2001. Up until this day, she had been a hardworking grandmother who worked in Pine River, Minnesota, a town of less than 1,000 people where everyone knows everyone. Pine River was a ghost town and not many people were out and about because it was 19 degrees Fahrenheit below zero that night. Rachel was working alone at Ultimate Liquors, where she had worked for a year and a half, preparing to close up shop for the night. She apparently went out and started her car parked in front of the building to warm it up and lock the front door behind her. Pine River Police Officer Sean Bennett was on patrol that night when he saw her Ford Escort running in the parking lot at 10 p.m., which was the closing time of the liquor store. Hours later, between midnight and 1 a.m., Officer Sean would pass by the liquor store again and see the car still running, sitting in front of the business. He stopped to check it out and determined no one was there. However, police would find Rachel's purse, glasses, and coat still in the store. Reports state that the back door was unlocked and it appeared she took the garbage out and had possibly encountered someone. The parking lot was a full sheet of ice, so there were no tire tracks, which made it very difficult for police to collect evidence. There were also no tracks found in the surrounding thick snow. Robbery was ruled out because no cash or merchandise appeared to be missing. There was also no signs of a struggle inside or outside of the store. The security cameras were unfortunately not recording that night. Investigators would suspect Rachel had been taken from the store against her will. Her daughter Jessica, her son-in-law, and grandchildren lived with her, and Jessica was the first person police notified. Authorities checked out Jessica and her husband's alibis, as well as Rachel's ex-husband, who was living in Princeton. However, their alibis checked out. Investigators looked at who was traveling along Highway 371 that night, looked at receipts made at the liquor store and what type of alcohol was purchased. All the people who made purchases from the liquor store during her shift cooperated and were eliminated as suspects. The last purchase rung up that night was at 9:56 p.m. and the transaction was never completed. This led detectives to believe this partial purchase was that of the suspect. While investigators and agents looked for clues, extensive searches were ongoing in Pine River and the surrounding area by air and land to find Rachel, but there were no signs of her anywhere. 6 weeks after her disappearance on April 13th, 4 teenagers were riding horses on the side of a narrow paved road in Breezy Point. One of the teens looked down in a ditch off Nelson Road and saw a female's body. That body was later determined to be the body of Rachel Anthony, located about 10 miles from where she was taken. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxia. Detectives said it appeared the suspect threw her body over the high-packed snowbank off the road and into the ditch, which was 20 feet down. Detectives stated, "Is just another indication that the person who did this was from this area. No one from out of this area would even know about this road. This is a back road between Pequot Lakes and Breezy Point, and only someone from this area would be able to find this road." Authorities couldn't determine an exact time of death, but believe it was right after her abduction. Many people speculate that the suspect didn't choose Rachel at random. It is in a very secure and rural area where you can go miles without seeing anyone or anything other than trees. The extremely low temperatures that night leads you to believe that no one would be out without purpose. It is believed that the suspect is someone from the area that knew what time she closed the store and is familiar with the rural area in which her body was found. The suspect has never been found, and her family continues to seek justice, but as of today, this case remains unsolved. Juliet Lramagat, affectionately known as Juju, was born on May 2, 2013. Her parents are Paraguayan Lillian Zapata and Frenchman Stefan Lramagat, who gave the little girl both nationalities. Charlotte, the couple's firstborn, completed their family. Eventually, The spouses divorced and Lillian joined Rainer Oberber, a German citizen who had arrived in Paraguay just a year before to settle in the country. It was known that he had worked on projects or campaigns related to human rights in Europe. Juliet had microcephaly, a neurological condition that causes motor disabilities and cognitive developmental delays. The girl was described as a cheerful, affectionate, and lively child who enjoyed playing outdoors. From mid-March 2020, Juliet had been living on a farm in the city of Ambascada with her mother, sister, and stepfather. According to reports about the case, Rainer convinced his partner to settle there when the quarantine was imposed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Everything seemed tranquil and almost idyllic in this corner of the country, but that calm was unexpectedly and dramatically shattered on April 15, 2020. On that day, little Juliet disappeared without a trace while on the property where, in addition to her family, there were 2 workers. According to information released by the Paraguayan newspaper ABC on the morning of April 16th, when the local school director realized that one of his students had been missing since the previous morning, he notified the authorities. Immediately, officers from the police station of Ambascada went to the residence of the family. It was at that moment that the mother reported her daughter's disappearance. Lillian said that the 7-year-old, who had difficulty moving and the cognitive development of a 3-year-old, had gone missing at around 9:30 in the morning the previous day while playing in the gated complex where they lived, along with a pair of goats that were also missing. She explained that, as time passed without her daughter returning, she asked for help from some neighbors to search the property, but they were unsuccessful. The search operation was immediately launched, involving police officers with trained dogs and the participation of local residents. As the hours passed, fears for the safety of the young girl grew. No one could believe that something like this could happen in that peaceful place. Additionally, on April 17th, a team accompanied Lillian to check 2 properties in different parts of Ambascada where they had lived, but they found no traces of the child. On the same day and in the following days, alongside search efforts, various law enforcement agencies conducted interviews with the mother, stepfather, and workers at the location. They also requested information from the telephone companies of the adults responsible for the minor and individuals connected to the case, as well as reviewed security camera footage from nearby businesses. Some witnesses reported seeing the child for the last time on April 15th at 10 in the morning. Initially, the hypothesis was that the child had gone missing while following the goats. However, investigators considered this version unlikely since the child had difficulty moving and the goats were pregnant and did not typically stray far from the area. The property covered about 30 hectares and included several buildings. With no traces of the child found on the property, the investigation was reinforced on April 20th with the addition of prosecutors from the anti-kidnapping unit. Day later, the goats with which Juliet was said to have been playing were found. They were found in good condition, for kilometers in a straight line from the house, passing through a densely wooded area. Due to her motor disability, it was impossible for the girl to make that journey with the animals. The next day, the police expanded the search nationwide. During the first 2 weeks of the investigation, the prosecution team conducted several searches on the family property. These inspections resulted in the discovery of blood traces in various places, including in a van driven by Rainer. In his initial statements to the prosecution, the German citizen claimed to have left the house twice in the mentioned vehicle on the day Juliet went missing. However, the police investigation would later determine that he had actually left the property a total of 3 times. In addition to the forensic and technical work being done to determine Rainer's possible involvement in the disappearance, officials in charge of the case obtained relevant information during their interviews with various witnesses. Juliet's nanny and one of the workers on the property told detectives that Rainer easily lost his patience when it came to the younger of his daughters. On the other hand, Juliet's sister, who was 10 years old at the time, made a statement using a special system, which is used to interview minors to ensure their safety and comfort. Day later, the young girl left the country as a protective measure to reunite with her biological father in Switzerland. The prosecutor in charge of the investigation detailed that a sports shoe, a sheet, a towel, and a carpet had been seized, all of which reacted to the blood detection reagent. He also stated that tests would be conducted to determine the origin of the blood residues. The representative of the public ministry reported that new searches had been conducted at various addresses and that 2 vans owned by Reiner had been seized, as well as electronic devices. He explained that although they were investigating the case as a missing persons case, they did not rule out any hypotheses from an intra-family matter to the involvement of a third party. It was also reported that a computer had mysteriously disappeared from the location. When questioned about it, Reiner stated that he had sent it for repairs but couldn't say where it was being examined. As the investigations continued and knowing that the authorities considered them as suspects, Reiner and Lillian made a video offering a reward of approximately 10 million Paraguayan guaraníes, approximately $1,400 at that time's exchange rate, for any valuable information that would help them find the child. In the message, they expressed that they were deeply affected. The mother spoke directly to her daughter, saying that she missed her as did her sister. She also explained that they were under restrictions because they were being investigated. As the days passed, Lillian and Reiner changed their initial version, which pointed to Juliet having gone missing. Instead, they now claimed that Juliet may have been abducted from the property and deprived of her freedom, a change in position that also raised suspicions among the authorities. While the prosecutors had this hypothesis on the table, it seemed unlikely because there were 200 meters from the property's entrance to the place where the child was last seen. This implied that, to take the child, the perpetrator would have had to get out of a vehicle, open a wooden gate, enter with the car, take the child and the 2 goats that had also disappeared, close the gate again, and leave. However, it was not credible that the 3 people in the house at that time did not hear the sound of a vehicle. Based on the findings during the investigations, the prosecutors charged the mother and stepfather of the child with failing in their duty of care and education, as well as abandonment. On May 4th, the public ministry searched the residence and arrested Lillian, 33, and Reiner, 55. The prosecution announced that both had declined to provide an interrogatory statement and were in preventive detention. One of the figures who appeared in the media and pointed to Reiner as a suspected person was Rufino Zapata, Lillian's father and Juliet's grandfather. During a radio interview, he stated that the family had strong suspicions that his daughter's partner could not stand the little girl. While he clarified that he could not accuse, the information they had made them think that the German citizen could be linked to his granddaughter's disappearance. Furthermore, the young girl's grandfather said he believed that his daughter knew something about what happened to her granddaughter and was under pressure not to give details about the case. He also expressed that Reiner was a horrible person and he feared what he might do. In mid-May, during a video call interview, Juliet's biological father expressed his trust in the detectives and requested that a complete investigation, especially Reiner. He mentioned that since Lillian joined the German citizen, she had distanced herself from her family and only associated with his circle. He said that he did not distrust Lillian, whom he considered a loving and careful mother, especially with Juliet. Additionally, he mentioned that his other daughter had told him about a very serious matter. He said that further investigation was needed and that he had some suspicions about what might have happened to the little girl, although he didn't know who was responsible. He was certain that it wasn't an accident. According to him, his elder daughter told him about the day her little sister disappeared. The girl said that while she, her mother, and other people were searching for Juliet, Reiner remained seated in front of his computer the entire time. He added that during that day and into the night, Lillian and the little girl were searching for Juliet, but they didn't have the help they needed. While defending his ex-wife, he also suggested that, in his opinion, she was a victim and had no idea what had happened. The father of the child appointed a group of lawyers, including Oscar Toma, to represent him. The attorneys filed a series of complaints against Juliet's stepfather, accusing him of deprivation of liberty and taking the life of his daughter. Oscar Toma had collaborated several times with an organization which had been working since 2013 for the protection of children in Paraguay, especially those declared missing. Reiner insisted on his innocence, stating that he had nothing to do with Juliet's disappearance. On May 18th, the police once again searched the Juliet family's property, but found no trace of the child. The police and the prosecution had already conducted a series of inspections, especially in places where German citizens who were part of Reiner's circle stayed. Electronic devices, closed-circuit recordings, and documentation were seized. A more intense search was also ordered, considering the possibility that the child might be found deceased. Some buildings were examined and floors were lifted, but none of these efforts yielded results. The media covered the case, especially the differences of opinion between Juliet's father and his lawyer, Oscar, who announced in early June that he was stepping away from the case. According to him, his job was to find the truth, but his client's demands would not allow it. When asked about it, he added that Stefan's decision to side solely against Reiner went against his convictions. The lawyer took the opportunity to explain that, in his opinion, all the pieces of evidence pointed to both of them as responsible for the child's disappearance. Despite intense efforts, the lack of results from the various actions undertaken caused frustration among both the investigators and the child's grandparents. However, as time went on and based on information contained in various seized devices during searches, detectives made discoveries that changed the course of the investigation. On July 23rd, the prosecution expanded the charges against Juliet's stepfather to include possession of child sexual content. In a press conference, the investigators revealed that, after analyzing 80,000 photographs contained in the seized electronic devices, they found adult material and intimate images of Juliet and her sister. According to the prosecutor, they had indications that the stepfather of the minors had captured the images. The established truth concept dictates that the person who took the photograph is considered the alleged perpetrator. This was articulated in the reasons for the charges against Reiner, as the images were found on his cell phone. Early the following year, the prosecutor in charge of the case declared that the investigation into Juliet's disappearance was getting closer to the truth. However, 2 months later, the case remained unsolved, and a decision by the main suspect came as a surprise. On March 17, 2021, the child's stepfather offered $350 million Paraguayan guaranis, approximately $44,600 at the exchange rate of that time, for information about Juliet's whereabouts. Through the lawyers who made the announcement, Reiner insisted on his innocence and claimed that he or the kidnappers of the child could have entered the property through the rolling gate or from the neighboring property. On that occasion, he defended the mother of the missing child, who was also being held against her will, and criticized the justice system, stating that he never imagined that the truth could be suppressed for so long and that judges and prosecutors were trampling the law. The following month, just before entering a hearing to provide an interrogatory statement, the German man made statements pointing to Rufino, Juliet's grandfather, and urged journalists to investigate his partner's father. If you want to investigate a bit, I'll give you a clue. Approach or ask Juliet's grandfather, who always says he knows more. And maybe he does know more than he says, and all I can tell you is that angels will become demons, and demons will become angels, he said. Rufino reacted to the accusations made by the main suspect in the case, stating that these accusations were part of a strategy by the lawyers. He also called on the prosecutors to follow him wherever they wanted and reiterated that his family was available for cooperation. In that context, he also mentioned that he had lost contact with his daughter months ago and emphasized that, in his opinion, she must know something about what happened to his granddaughter. While awaiting trial, an appeals court granted Lillian limited freedom of movement. On September 24, 2021, Lillian Zapata was sentenced to 6 years in prison for failing in her duty of care and abandonment of her daughter. Despite the guilty verdict, she remained free pending the confirmation of her sentence. In the case of Reiner, unlike his partner, he was acquitted of these same charges. The court believed that he had no involvement in the act of abandonment. However, he still faced charges related to the possession of sexual content involving minors. Only 2 months later, on November 9th, Lillian was once again sentenced. She was given an additional 2 years of imprisonment with the suspension of the sentence's execution after being found guilty of contempt of a court order. The November ruling came in response to her refusal to undergo a DNA test, which was intended to determine if the blood traces found during the investigations matched the child. She also rejected a toxicology test that aimed to determine if she consumed narcotics. I don't know. The prosecution never informs me of anything. They never communicated with me. From jail, I did everything for them to investigate, even sent a letter to the French embassy. All I ask is that they search for and find my daughter. Lillian refused, arguing that it was her body and she wouldn't give consent for the tests. Before the end of 2021, the court revoked the decision to keep Reiner in preventive detention. The verdict established that the public ministry did not find sufficient evidence to incriminate him, absolving him of all guilt and penalty. In an unexpected turn of events, a video posted on a popular social network on May 31, 2022, showed a girl on the streets of Ecuador who appeared to have the same characteristics as young Juliet. The recording was apparently made in public by two foreigners. When asked about it, officials from the public ministry confirmed that the girl in the video seemed to be Juliet, but provided no further details to protect the ongoing investigation. Nevertheless, it was announced that a technical verification of the content and origin was being conducted. This information led Stefan to request a copy of the Swiss documents to travel to Ecuador to verify if the girl in the video that circulated on social media was Juliet. His request led to an incident at the airport, during which his older daughter, after visiting her mother in Paraguay, was detained by airport authorities when she was about to return to Europe. It was reported that officials found her missing sister's documents among the girl's belongings. As a result, the girl missed her flight, but there were no other reported consequences. In a new chapter of this case, Judge ordered the capture of Lillian to enforce the prison sentence imposed in 2021 for the charges of violating her duty of care, and on August 16, 2023, Juliet's mother appeared before the court and requested the postponement of her imprisonment, invoking a provision in the penal code that allows the postponement of the sentence for mothers of children under 1 year old. However, on August 17th, the court ruled against her request and ordered her immediate confinement at the National Women's Penitentiary, where she will serve her 6-year sentence. The judge mandated that her baby must receive pediatric care, social assistance, and all necessary care to ensure the well-being of the child and his mother during the breastfeeding stage. 3 years have passed since Juliet's disappearance, and many loose ends remain. One of the hypotheses being considered is that the girl disappeared on April 14th, a day before the date the parents reported to the authorities, following an incident inside the house, and was subsequently moved to another location with the goats. To this day, it remains unconfirmed whether the blood found during the investigations belongs to Juliet, among other reasons due to the refusal of Lillian and the biological father to provide the necessary samples for DNA comparative studies. Nevertheless, Steifen remains vigilant for any progress in the investigations and has offered a reward for information leading to Juliet's whereabouts. Juliet's grandfather, Rufino, also refuses to give up. On several occasions, he has expressed his concern about the lack of results in the investigation and has requested the collaboration of the public to report any information or suspicions that could lead to Juliet's discovery. National authorities assure that the investigation is ongoing and the police are following several leads. All that remains is to hope that the responsible party or parties for Juliet's disappearance confess, or that someone provides credible information that leads the authorities to the truth. Megan Renee Fogelsong was born January 20, 1994. Her parents divorced when she was about 6 years old. At 9 years old, she moved to Oneida, Illinois to live with her father and stepmother. Years later, she moved back to Alden, Kansas to live with her mother. Pam is described as having a wild lifestyle and having a somewhat competitive friendship with her daughter. At some point, her mother would unfortunately introduce her to David Madden. David was her mom's ex-lover, and he was 14 years older than Megan. David was a former Marine, but was described as paranoid and violent with hatred towards law enforcement and the government. She began having a tumultuous relationship with David, and the couple were on and off again. David was very physically and mentally abusive and once placed her in a straitjacket at gunpoint and threatened to end her life. Frustrated with the abuse, she briefly moved back to Illinois to be with her dad and stepmom, but she would unfortunately again return to Alden and reconnect with David. In December 2014, David and Megan were at her friend Kelly Starnes' home when Kelly made a frantic 911 call. Even after this, they would make up and continue dating. On November 30th, 2015, Megan would register her last activity on Facebook when she replied to a message from a friend and said she was at David's house. The next day, David would text his neighbor, who was also the local sheriff, and say he caught Megan stealing from him, which led to an argument and she left. On December 7th, Megan's phone sent a text to a friend saying, "I'm fine." However, her friend is not sure whether she sent the message herself or not. Due to her lifestyle, 21-year-old Megan was not reported missing until February 10, 2016, over 2 months after she was last seen. She was spontaneous, but had never gone for an extended time without contacting her loved ones. She had a prepaid phone and the carrier doesn't keep records for it after 10 days. So authorities were unable to use phone records to help with their investigation. Megan told 2 friends that if she ever disappeared, David would probably be the one responsible. In February 2017, David, who was wanted for questioning and the disappearance of Megan, would lead police on a high-speed chase through Rice County and Barton County, Kansas, and was arrested later that day. He was charged with aggravated assault in that case and sentenced to probation. Searches of his property turned up 2 crates containing 24 metal pipe bombs, 2 live military ordnance projectiles, 12 containers of smokeless powder, a railroad torpedo, a .45 caliber pistol, and an AK-47 machine gun. He said he'd found the machine gun in Iraq while serving there with the Marines and brought it back to the U.S. In April 2019, he was indicted on 1 count of illegal possession of a machine gun and became wanted on a federal warrant. Later that month, he and his girlfriend Erin and her 7-year-old son were pulled over by an officer. Erin was driving and her young son was in the back seat. David then shot the undersheriff 5 times out the window. After the shooting, Erin claims David forced her to drive at gunpoint. She drove to his home where he then loaded a laundry basket with guns and ammunition. Then she drove him to his father Tom Madden's home in Raymond, Kansas, where David fatally shot him. When police arrived at the scene that evening, David shot the sheriff and exchanged gunfire with other officers, and then after a 6-hour standoff, David fatally shot himself. His girlfriend Erin was then arrested for obstructing apprehension of David and aggravated endangering of a child because she knew he was a felon that carried a gun. A mutual friend of David and Megan's reported that after her disappearance, David said to them, "No one else will have to worry about her again." There is an overwhelming amount of information in this case, which could be speculation, rumors, or just hard to prove, so I won't be covering it all. What we do know is Megan has never been found, but foul play is suspected, and sadly, as of today, this case remains unsolved. Rachel Geraldine Pratt was born May 8, 1979. She had 7 siblings and grew up in Garden City, Kansas. At the age of 14, she began sneaking around with an 18-year-old boy. When she was 15 years old, she was caught shoplifting a pregnancy test from Walmart. Her mother became very upset, demanding to know who she could be pregnant by, not knowing that she had been seeing the 18-year-old. Rachel eventually admitted to having an older boyfriend and gave her mother his name. Her mother Jan went to the boy's home and spoke to his father. Then the boy's mother called Jan and told her that her son was not involved with Rachel. In the meantime, she took Rachel to the health department to verify her pregnancy. After this, she took Rachel to the police department to file a report because of their age difference. A few weeks later, the boy went to the police department and confirmed that he was indeed Rachel's boyfriend. He was then charged with aggravated and indecent liberties with a child on December 31, 1994. 2 weeks later, Rachel would go missing. She was last seen watching a movie at home with her brother around 1 a.m. on January 16, 1995. Jan came home from work at 2 a.m. and realized Rachel and her coat were gone, and her son had fallen asleep during the movie. She stayed up all night waiting for Rachel to come home and claimed that at 5 a.m. she heard a car driving near her house and recognized it as Rachel's boyfriend's. Although her family reported Rachel missing to the police, they didn't actively start investigating until 5 days after she disappeared. Around the time the police started their investigation, a group of girls claimed that they had seen Rachel talking on a payphone and her boyfriend was with her. They claimed that after they finished the phone call, they left the phone booth and then asked the girls for a ride. The couple then went into Dylan's grocery store. This witness sighting is uncorroborated and the boyfriend denies this incident even took place. The boyfriend claims that he had not had any contact with Rachel after her disappearance and that he had no part in it either. Rachel was scheduled to be a witness against her boyfriend who was being prosecuted for unlawful sexual relations with her. Because Rachel disappeared before she could testify, the charges were dropped. Rachel's father now lives in Illinois, but her mother has stayed in the same house and keeps the same phone number in the hopes that Rachel might someday return. There is no evidence to indicate that Rachel has given birth. There's also no record of her ever receiving a driver's license, a copy of her birth certificate, or a social security card. There have been no sightings of her in many years, but authorities remain hopeful that she is still alive. To this day, the boyfriend has not been ruled out as a suspect, but the police say there isn't much to indicate foul play, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. 13-year-old Beverly Ward was born and raised in Junction City, Kansas. On July 4, 1978, at her home on 227 West 11th Street, she and a neighboring 9-year-old girl who was in town visiting a relative across the street had come over to have a sleepover. There were 2 beds in Beverly's room, and she was sleeping in one and the 9-year-old girl was in the other. In the early morning hours, Beverly's family were awoken by a commotion outside. Someone had thrown a brick through an apartment window, and everyone had gotten up to see what was going on. At this time, the family assumed Beverly had woken up as well and was watching the commotion with them. Once the disturbance was over, they realized Beverly was not with them and was missing from the home. Her mother, Bernia Ward, would report her missing at 5:30 a.m. Beverly was scheduled to go to summer camp that day and had her bags packed along with $12 she had saved for the trip. Upon investigating her room, they found none of her clothes were missing and the $12 was still there. They also found the window screen directly above her bed was cut and removed. At this point, investigators believed that someone came in her room between 3 and 5 a.m. and took Beverly. Also, it was a hot night and investigators believe the window may have already been open and the person who took Beverly only had to deal with the window screen. The 9-year-old girl who had been sleeping in the same room said she never heard or saw anything. The police spoke with neighbors and friends at the time to find some leads, but were unsuccessful. Information was entered into the National Crime Information Center computer system, and they notified the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. In 1978, Junction City had a reputation as a transient area where people used it as a community to pass through or to temporarily reside in. There were a few suspects questioned in connection to Beverly's disappearance, 2 of whom were seen in a vehicle by neighbors, but the sighting wasn't around the time Beverly went missing. A 3rd person who was in the area was also named as a person of interest, but no evidence could tie them to the case. Also, none of her family members are considered suspects in her case. Beverly has never been found, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Vincent Moore was born March 3, 2015 to Michelle Mendez and Gary Moore. On June 5, 2015, Michelle dropped off 3-month-old Vincent and his 2-year-old brother at their father Gary's home for visitation. Gary took both children to Texas sometime in mid to late June, and they stayed there until July 9th before he returned to Wichita, Kansas. During this time, Michelle made repeated attempts to get in touch with Gary and see the children, but she was unable to reach them, so at the end of the month, she notified police. Vincent was last seen with Gary in the early morning hours of July 11, 2015, leaving his house near South Hydraulic Avenue and Tulsa Street in Wichita, Kansas. Gary was carrying a blue and black floral print diaper bag. Gary was arrested at a traffic stop in Wichita on July 29th, 18 days after Vincent was last seen. He was arrested and jailed on unrelated warrants for probation violations and failure to appear in court. When he was arrested, he had Vincent's 2-year-old brother with him, but not Vincent. Gary claimed he gave Vincent back to Michelle when he returned from Texas, but she says that is not true and she doesn't know where her son is. Michelle would pass a polygraph test backing up her story. Soon after his disappearance, police searched along railroad tracks in a wooded area near the Wichita suburb of Derby, Kansas, but turned up empty-handed. In 2014, before Vincent was born, Gary was sentenced to probation for misdemeanor battery on Michelle. He was ordered to pay court cost, report to a probation officer, wear a GPS tracking device on his ankle, and have no contact with Michelle. Despite all this, Michelle and him would marry in February 2015. After Vincent went missing, Gary was sentenced to a year in jail for violating his probation by failing to pay his court cost. Also, before he traveled to Texas, he had cut off the GPS tracking device on his ankle, which led to an additional charge. In May 2016, he would plead guilty to this charge for tampering with electronic monitoring equipment and was sentenced to additional time in prison. According to court documents, Michelle was concerned for the safety of their children when they were in Gary's care. She filed for a protective order on June 18th, 2 weeks after she last saw the boys. In her application, she wrote that Gary had never intentionally hurt Vincent and his brother, but stated Gary was rougher than he intends to be, and that he tried to use the children to control her. She said she thought it was only a matter of time before he heard them. In August 2015, Kansas Department of Child Protective Services removed Vincent's brother from Michelle's custody and placed him in foster care. At a hearing held in October, DCF officials said there was clear and convincing evidence that Vincent is deceased. Vincent has since been declared legally dead. However, Gary's family has stated they believe Vincent is still alive. Gary states that he believes Michelle stashed him somewhere and he hopes that he is still alive. As of today, no one has been arrested in connection with baby Vincent's disappearance and his case remains unsolved. On February 23, 1999, 39-year-old star Gail Boomer was visiting Uncle Mike's bar, now called Nobody's Business, in Kansas City, Kansas with her roommate Carolyn Marshall. Carolyn stated while they were in the bar, a male stranger walked up to Gail and for no apparent reason threw her off the bar stool. She then got up and insisted she was all right and her attacker was forced to leave. Carolyn would leave the bar after finishing her drink and ask the bartender to keep an eye on Gail, whom she planned to pick up later. When Carolyn returned to the bar, she was told that Gail had already left with 2 men. 5 days later, with no word from Gail, Carolyn reported her missing. Witnesses at the bar told authorities that she was involved in an altercation with another patron during the evening. The individual is believed to be a career criminal with a history of violent behavior, particularly towards women. He allegedly knocked her to the ground and beat her, causing her to lose consciousness. According to the witnesses, Gail had not left the bar with 2 men like her roommate was told. In fact, she was dragged out of the bar by the 2 men. She has never been heard from again, and authorities believe she may have met foul play inside the bar and her body hidden in another location. In October 1999, William Eugene Gino Spradlin and Robert Franklin Butchhorn were charged with second-degree murder in Gail's case. Both suspects have extensive criminal histories and have served time in prison. The charges were later dismissed because over a dozen witnesses to the alleged crime refused to testify against the defendants because they were terrified to cooperate. Authorities believe that several people have information related to the case, but the individuals have not come forward. One of the bar patrons who was a witness in Gail's case was Sean Pernis. Sean's wife Renee disappeared in 2009 and he was later convicted of her murder, although his wife's body has never been located. However, he isn't considered a suspect in Gail's case and was only questioned because he was a witness to Gail being assaulted the first time. He said in an interview from prison that he was a medic at the time and bandaged her arm. He then goes on to say that the 2 suspects returned to the bar later that night without Gail and covered in dust which they assumed was from a local rock quarry. Investigators reopened the case in 2017 and began to do more searching for her body. They ripped up tiles and baseboards at the bar looking for bloodstains. They are trying to locate a possible witness named Edward who may have worked as a mechanic. Authorities don't believe he was directly involved in the suspected murder, but they think he has information on it. He used to frequent the Turner section of Kansas City, Kansas, and possibly lived or worked in the area, but has since moved out of state. Over the years, detectives have searched caves and tunnels looking for Gail, but have found nothing. In 2019, police got a tip that she was buried beneath the concrete of a house where her boyfriend lived at the time. A cadaver dog indicated it smelled something and radar showed something below the foundation, but her body was never found. Also in 2019, The empty lot near the bar where Gail lived at the time in the 1700 block of South 49th Street was searched and dug up over several days. But again, nothing. Gail's sister, Cynthia Hurdy, became a private detective and trained with search and rescue dogs. She has personally confronted the suspects and searched for her sister's body. Her family hopes that the witnesses will reconsider and agree to testify one day. She also states that the police were unable to search a truck owned by one of the suspects. Another vehicle owned by the bartending girlfriend of one of the suspects was found burned either to destroy evidence or to intimidate her. Gail left behind a 3-year-old son who was raised by his grandparents after her disappearance. As of today, this case remains unsolved. The case of the Shelter of Terror. Rosa del Carmen Verduzco was born in 1934 in Zamora, Mexico, into a wealthy and well-positioned family within the community. She and her 4 siblings received a good education due to their status. Money was not a concern for the Verduzcos, but something about this privileged reality troubled Rosa's mind. While she and her family could afford anything they wanted and enjoy a good life, thanks to her father's ability to run commercial businesses, other children faced harsher realities. This seemed unacceptable to her, and from the moment she became aware of it, a compelling need to make a change about the issue that bothered her was born. Even at a young age, she understood that it was up to her to make a difference. However, this task would not be easy, as she came from a strict family and she knew it well. It was rumored among the inhabitants of Zamora that in her pre-teens, Rosa had fallen in love with a laborer, and her parents did everything possible to stop the progression of that relationship. At that time, Rosa had no choice but to accept her parents' order to distance herself from Fatman. Outraged by what she had to endure, she swore she would never marry, but she would have children. One day, while walking through the streets of her city, she met a boy slightly younger than her, who was 13 at the time, living in the open. Rosa felt she could not turn a blind eye and had to remedy the terrible situation the boy was going through, rescuing him from poverty. She took him to live in her house with her family, so he could finally rest under a roof and have a meal on the table. Her parents refused, considering her too young to face such a responsibility, but they eventually agreed to receive him due to her persistence. For time, this activity became a habit for Rosa, or rather, her passion. After a few months, the number of children living under her care had multiplied. Amidst this turmoil in the Verduzco household, her father passed away. Although this terrible event deeply affected Rosa, she saw it as an opportunity to fully pursue her dream. So then, she convinced her mother to buy her a house where she could shelter and help more children. On one hand, Rosa was just as young as her rescued children and also needed adult care, but on the other hand, she would no longer have to occupy her own space. This was how Rosa settled in her first home, but she experienced firsthand what it was like to live without money or food. Far from being an impediment, she went out to walk the streets of the city with the other children to earn their daily food. Her dream was coming true as more and more children arrived at the home under her wing. The shelter began to receive donations from residents and prominent personalities who were moved by Rosa's altruism, allowing her to gather the necessary funds to buy a larger plot of land and build a shelter with much more capacity. The same shelter that years later became known as La Gran Familia. Rosa Verduzco's work was quickly recognized by the population, who were inspired by her commitment and devotion to the care of minors, and consequently, donations soon appeared. Food, school supplies, cleaning products, and money, among other things, made it possible to maintain the place that Rosa and her children built with their own hands. In 1947, La Gran Familia opened its doors, but it was in 1973 that the establishment became a civil association, not only receiving street children but also those whose parents could not maintain them due to various difficulties, or who were affected by substance abuse. Keeping them under a roof was one of the objectives, but the priority of the shelter was to provide them with the necessary education to allow them to be professional and independent individuals in the future. For this reason, they had an educational program including primary, secondary, high school, and even university extension careers recognized and validated by the government. In addition to conventional training, the minors attended physical education classes, sewing workshops, and many more categories. However, one of the most outstanding and proudest for Rosa was musical learning. The children residing in the establishment had to learn to play an instrument or sing. Thanks to this, a large orchestra was formed that did not miss a celebration without presenting their musical number. La Grande Familia gained great popularity, reaching the ears of many politicians who decided to support and get involved in the project. Governors like Vicente Fox and Felipe Calderon, to name a few, became great admirers and allies of Rosa Verduzco. The work carried out there was so recognized that even during a visit by Queen Elizabeth of England to Mexico, she requested to meet Rosa Verduzco in addition to donating a bus for transporting the children and money to build a gymnasium. Rosa agreed to the meeting but added a condition to the Queen's request. She was willing to receive her if the children could be present at the venue and share a meal with her and the prince consort, as well as offer them a musical number. Rosa Verduzco made it happen. It was known that, with her undeniable determination, she could achieve everything she wanted, and she had already proven it over decades. Thanks to that defining character, over the years, hundreds of children were welcomed into that home. All were received. However, as often happens in such cases, not everyone was very happy with her way of being. Rosa Verduzco faced controversies from the beginning of her project. One of the first reasons she was criticized concerned the location of the shelter, as it was located in an affluent area of the city. Her neighbors were not willing to share space with an establishment that, at first glance, looked deplorable, as it had been built by inexperienced hands, and occasionally some walls would crumble and had to be rebuilt. However, there were more terrifying reasons to judge what happened at La Grande Familia. Amid so much kindness and generosity seemed to hide a secret that only those behind those doors seemed to know, or at least someone that no one dared to tell, for fear of Rosa's reprisals. It was very common among the neighbors of the city to see her in the streets with a group of children. Some were sent to beg for money or sell newspapers to collect money. Meanwhile, others, the more privileged or at least chosen by her, accompanied her to have a chocolate she invited them to, but it was on these occasions that Rosa's authoritarian character became visible to those outside the shelter. In popular celebrations, when the town gathered in the streets, Rosa sent the children to ask for toys and authorized them to bite people who refused to give them anything. On the other hand, merchants or anyone who crossed her path were obligated to make some type of donation that Rosa demanded. The woman had the freedom to do and undo. It was evident that she had a power that exceeded her good intentions of running a home for children. Soon, the inhabitants of the city realized who this popular personality really was. She was greatly admired to the extent that parents threatened their misbehaving children with sending them to Rosa's place, as if that was the worst punishment they could receive. Everyone was aware and divided between those who praised her and those who hated her. However, what seemed unnoticed by the authorities was the actual happenings at the shelter, as no one dared to even visit the place occasionally to ensure it was operating according to governmental regulations. For 60 years, Rosa operated with perpetual impunity, aided by a corrupt system that delegated to one person the work others were incapable of doing. But the truth hidden beneath her kindness and generosity was unmasked in July 2014. After receiving more than 50 complaints from people external to the shelter and survivors of that hell, the Attorney General's Office of the Republic intervened at La Grande Familia to begin an intense search. Families of people who had been through the place and those who had experienced the mistreatments recounted to authorities about extreme conditions of insalubrity, carnal abuses, physical punishments, and deprivation of freedom. During the search at La Grande Familia, the police confirmed a huge amount of spoiled food that was provided to the children, which consequently led to severe cases of malnutrition. Among the testimonies, a survivor recounted being forced to eat flies just to get something in his stomach. Furthermore, other horrifying confessions reported that an endless number of crimes occurred there, threatening the integrity of the children, with numerous cases of abuses perpetrated by the same teachers or caregivers of the shelter. Some stated that within the establishment, there were many pregnant women who, after being forced to give birth, had their children taken away and registered under the Verduzco surname, thereby depriving the mothers of any rights over their babies. Thousands of children were adopted by Rosa Verduzco, despite its illegality, and worse yet, nobody stopped her from committing the crime. On the contrary, it was allowed. What Rosa did next with those children is even more heinous. Having legal custody of the adopted people allowed her to keep them away from their families until they reached adulthood. Whenever their relatives tried to visit them, they were violently expelled from the institution. But later, when they were supposedly able to finally go out into the world as restored individuals, Rosa demanded an exorbitant sum of money in return as she had authority over them, effectively finding under that excuse a way to traffic people. It was impossible for these families to gather the demanded sum, so some never managed to leave. Moreover, if they tried to escape, they faced brutal beatings and confinement in cells, to the point that one of the victims reported that after a failed escape attempt, their ears were cut off as punishment. What had once been a shelter had ultimately become a prison. Long list of testimonies exposed the tortures and crimes committed within La Gran Familia. At the time, the Attorney General's office witnessed firsthand the deplorable state of the facilities. Children sleeping in broken bunk beds, among trash, rats, and bed bugs, completely dirty bathrooms, and terrible infrastructure. The nauseating odor emanating from the place could be felt from the street with excrement, urine, and decomposing food, revealing the reality that was lived there. It was evident that the place was neglected and the money from donations was not being used for improvements. These findings cast doubt on the benevolence that had positioned Rosa Verduzco as a legend, a saintly figure in Mexico and the world for decades. Thus, finally, on July 1534, the 81-year-old woman and 6 of her assistants were arrested. Meanwhile, more than 600 people living there, including minors and adults, were rescued from the precarious conditions. Despite all the evidence against her, Rosa Verduzco was released without any charges due to her delicate health condition. The burden of pre-existing illnesses, such as diabetes and heart problems, led to physical and cerebral deterioration, requiring her to be hospitalized. While outside the building, a crowd gathered to pray for her speedy recovery. Others protested against the justice system's decision for not acting in accordance with the reported evidence. Finally, 2 years later, at the age of 84, after being hospitalized again for 20 days, Rosa del Carmen Verduzco passed away due to a sudden stroke. As for the other accused, out of the 6, only 2 were charged with the crimes committed. The others were released just like Rosa. In 2016, 2 years after the discovery of the truth, the Attorney General's office declared itself incompetent to follow up on the investigation into the case, deciding to leave it in the hands of the state. To everyone's surprise, the case remained unresolved, without any resolution and much less any detainees paying the sentence they deserved for the committed crimes, including deprivation of liberty, the abuse suffered by the children, and the trafficking of them, among other horrific acts. The nickname The Boss was not given to Rosa randomly. It was her political contacts who called her that due to her decisive character, her authoritarian personality, and her ability to run a business of such magnitude. What never became clear was how a person with such a strong vocation for service from an early age turned into such a sinister figure, forgetting the true reason why she was there. Some theories suggest that she was involved with Mexican cartels and that La Gran Familia was an ideal place for money laundering. Others believe her ties with politicians personally benefited her, and in exchange for those favors, she forced people to vote for her allies. Indeed, there were those who claimed she was an ambitious woman, extremely strict, who enjoyed others' suffering and having control. The reality is that today, the population is divided between those who choose to believe in her good intentions, considering her a saint in life, and those who assert she was one of the most evil people in Mexican history. This contradiction has sparked discussions even among renowned personalities in culture and politics. What cannot be forgotten is that once again the judicial system has been incapable of providing a certain response to a population that for years hoped the truth would be revealed, and that when it finally happened, nothing changed. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.